Alright, in this video, this is going to be part 3 to the Google Sidebar. Our main goals here are working on a little bit of styling. Some global colors, maybe some fonts, and working on these divider bars. And I've come to the conclusion I pretty much want to replicate this Google Sidebar throughout this entire series. So if you followed along in part 1, the basic layout, this right here is good to go. Then in part 2, we looked at the weather image, and that's what I have loaded up over here. You can follow along with all of these parts to this series by going to my free wallpapers folder. We got Sidebar Part 1, Sidebar Part 2, and I will be adding Sidebar Part 3 that's going to have the styling applied to it. So the 4 new globals we're going to add here are BG for the background of the card, Steel Rec for the steel rectangles, these green ones that you see, text color, that's going to be the color of our text, as well as our divider bars to provide somewhat of a matching effect there. And then our font. You may be wondering, why didn't we do this earlier before we copied and pasted everything? Well, all we have to do is delete a few rectangles, recopy and repaste. And plus, I didn't want to overwhelm you with number globals and color globals and font globals all at once. So, these are the 4 pieces we're going to focus on. Back in our items, I did tell you in part 2 that I wanted to copy and paste this thing, the unhide layer. Well, since we're going to be making some changes, we are still going to copy and paste later, but for now, let's take that unhide layer and let's delete it. Let's go into the sidebar, let's go into the stack group, and let's delete all of these rows with the exception of the first one. We didn't destroy anything because we still have number globals applied correctly, so we can still copy and paste in a moment, and we're going to have these rows right back. I'm going to go into this one overlap group, go to the rectangle, go to its paint, and I'm going to apply the steel rectangle global. So we're good there. We do have a blue rectangle. Now back inside of this one overlap group, the stack group that we created inside of there, let's go to the text, apply the font, and let's also apply the text color for the color of our font. Now, maybe this doesn't look too good, but hey, we have globals applied to this. We can easily change these later on. And then back inside of Sidebar, the BG rectangle, that's the entire big card that we see here. Let's go to its paint and let's set it to BG. Now back inside of the Sidebar, that stack group one more time, I want to recreate the sidebar that I showed you back at the introduction. I had 9 rows, so I'm going to copy this one again that I now have the font, the blue rectangle or whatever color rectangle I want, as well as the font color applied to this. So when we copy and paste it, we don't have to do that again. Now when I copied these 9 groups now, you can see that we do have something hanging off. We can easily fix that with the number globals. But for now, I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to rename these 1 through 9 just for organization purposes. You can name them whatever you want. So we now have 1 through 9. Let's go back to our globals. Let's make it so we can see all of these. To do that, a couple of changes we can make. The icon size will adjust the icon that we will eventually have here, as well as the height of this blue rectangle. Just by knocking it down to 80, we can see all 9 of them just fine, equally spaced. Maybe not that much spacing is preferred, so ver-ext for vertical extra. Bumping that down to 20. Maybe make our icon size a little bit bigger now. I'm happy with that. And I lightened up the steel rectangle. Later on towards the end, as a matter of fact, that steel rectangle in my final piece that we make will be completely transparent, but I want to give you that option there to have some color if you want it for the steel rectangle. And now I'm just kind of playing around with them, just getting different looks. A darker background, a lighter rectangle. But again, that's totally up to you for your styling purposes. All right, let's come back to the sidebar. Let's go to the stack group, and I want to add 2 divider bars. The first one I'm going to put is between the 3rd one and the 4th one, because in my original piece, the introduction, these 3 up here opened up an app, whereas the next 5 were animated, and then this last one opened up my settings app. So I want to put one between the 3rd and the 4th and between the 8th and the 9th. To do that, inside of this stack group, I'm going to add a thin rectangle. So here's our square for right now, but let's make it a rectangle. And I'm going to leave it somewhat thick for right now. And this width here, I want this to change dynamically based on the width, but something else I also like for it to have is the same width as this weather image up here, where we applied some border to it. It's the same code, Does this code look familiar? GV width divided by 100, we're getting some percentage of the width of our screen, and then we're subtracting 2 borders. Now, just in case you can't notice this, but yes, that rectangle down here, it is a little gap here and a little gap here. And that's all based on the fact that 1, we applied that code, and 2, we have this rectangle inside of this stack group, and that stack group is vertically centered. That is important. If I change that to vertical left, it's going to push that rectangle over to the left. You will not notice any change with these other rows because those rows have a width of the same width as our entire card. So setting that to vertical center will give you equal spacing using that GV border. We use 2 of them. Now let's come and drag this rectangle. I said I wanted it in between the 3rd and the 4th. So I'm going to drop it right there in between the 3rd and the 4th, and now we have it up here. Let's go to that rectangle. Let's go to position, and let's add some top and bottom padding to give us a little bit more extra space between our sections of apps that open up and our animated icons, just for styling purposes. Top padding, I'm going to use the one number global that we have not used yet that I've talked about, and that is div pad, divider padding. What that did is gave us some padding up top. Let's repeat this for the bottom. And now notice we have more spacing in between these top 3 and these next rows of icons. Let's go back to the rectangle. I don't want my rectangle to be that thick. Maybe somewhere around 2, 3, or 4. I'm gonna go over to its paint, and I like for this paint, this color, to match whatever my text color is. That's totally optional. That's up to you, but that's what I'm gonna go with here. So the divider bars will have the same color as our text in this example. So now let's take that divider bar, that shape, let's copy and paste into the same stack group. We now have this one at the very bottom, but if I want to drag it up in between the 8th and the 9th, boom, we have it right there. Now that's a little bit too much spacing for my liking, so I can head over to globals, go over to the div pad, and that's why we have so much padding there is 25. Maybe if I bump that down to about 5 or maybe 10, it's still putting more spacing in between this divider bar here and here than what we have for all of our additional rows. Ultimately, this is going to prevent you from tapping something that you don't want to tap, and plus it just looks a little bit more organized. And now to just point out a few things, if I bump that border up, what you're going to notice is that the weather image appears to get smaller, and now look at our divider bars. Those are getting shorter at the same rate. I don't want it to look like that, so I'm going to bump that back on down. And then if we come in here to the width of our entire card, as we change that width, notice we still have the same gap on both sides of our divider bar as well as our weather image up here. And what I want to point out here is this: if I make my width too small, in this case it's not too small. The problem here is this: you may notice it's not hugging the left side anymore. What we need to fix there is that this icon text size is too much. It's hanging off the card. So if we come in here and bump the ICO text size down to say, let's go with 25. As long as it's sitting inside of that rectangle, we're good. That will hug this bar over here to the left. That's why I have all these number globals. Prime example of where I'm trying to show you, if something looks jacked up, if you fine tune another number global, everything should be fine. And there you have it, the styling for our Google sidebar. In the next video, I think we're going to focus on the icons using a great app called Iconsy. So stay tuned for that. And that's it for this video. I hope it helped.